2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 7. For God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. Paul understood that Timothy was fearful and timid by nature. Unless he dealt with this crippling fear, he would not be able to serve the Lord effectively. So Paul is encouraging him by reminding that God has not given us a spirit of fear. In other words, Timothy, you need to deal with this kind of fear. Brothers and sisters, let me pause here for a moment and ask you, what fears are destroying your life? What is that you are more afraid of in life? Is there a fear that cripples your ability to serve God effectively? I think you need to deal with that. Before we look at how to deal with this kind of fear, let me point it out to you from Numbers chapter 13. In their journey to the promised land, the Israelites were at Kadesh Barnea. The Lord commanded Moses to send 12 spies into Canaan before they could conquer the land. Accordingly, the spies went in and returned back after 40 days with their report. Though they acknowledged that it was a land flowing with milk and honey, the majority of the spies said, and I am reading Numbers chapter 13, verse 28, but the people who live there are powerful, and the cities are fortified and very large. We even saw descendants of Anak there. Nevertheless, however, but, these are the words they use. The people who live there are powerful. Brothers and sisters, I want you to note this. What the spies saw in Canaan terrified them. So the more they thought about the people of the land and their fortified cities, it began to overwhelm them. So fear had found a place in them by what they saw. Remember, fear is also contagious. The report of the 10 spies spread fear in the camp, and all of a sudden, panic sets in. They were crying aloud and felt that they were all going to die by the sword. Some therefore even suggested that they should now travel back to Egypt. Destructive fear always focuses on worst case scenarios. Even before the battles began, the Israelites had already predicted its outcome, that they were going to be slaughtered by the people who lived in Canaan. Fear diminishes the positives and highlights the negative. The excitement about the land and its fertility, the whole narrative that this land is a land flowing with milk and honey, all of a sudden, such talk is gone. Now the talk is all about the giants and their fortified cities. Likewise, fear also dims the view of God's goodness in the past. In fact, the Israelites had experienced worse situations in the past. With God's help, they came out of the clutches of Egypt, one of the powerful armies of the time. With God's help, they walked through the barren bottom of the Red Sea. All those memories are instantly wiped away by fear. This is what fear is capable of doing in our lives too. Fear often takes root in our lives through what we see, what we hear, what we read, what we get to know, so on and so forth. In other words, facts trigger fears. Let me repeat that again. Facts trigger fears. The facts may be fully true, partially true, or fully false, but they have the potential to unsettle us. In 2017, doctors incidentally found that I had some lesions on my liver and it needs to be investigated further. They wanted to rule out any malignancy. The investigation went on for another 5 months. Those times were very horrifying. After the biopsy result, Another 4 months went on before we could finalize on the treatment. There was so much of uncertainty. Now, during this time, what I heard from others and what I read from the internet caused me more mental damage than the real disease itself. I just couldn't stop thinking about worst case scenarios. There was a time when I felt that I would die of anxiety and panic attacks. I know personally what fear can do to somebody. I have walked through the valley of the shadow of death in virtual reality. There were times when I pleaded with God to take away my fears more than I asked Him to heal me from my sickness. Now, looking back, I thank the Lord for the deliverance He has given me from my fears. Brothers and sisters, as I mentioned earlier, fear is natural human response about the unknown. In times like this, it is very much possible to be overwhelmed by fear. Now, the most important question: how do we tackle destructive fear? In other words, how do we prevent fear from overwhelming us? How do we fight fears? First thing is to realize the battle against fear is a battle of our mind. If we can win the mind battle, much of victory is already ours. Please listen to me carefully. Just the way some facts trigger fears, we need to understand that facts can also eliminate or minimize our fears. Let me repeat that again. Just the way some facts trigger fears within us, we need to understand that some other facts can also eliminate or minimize our fears. Now, what are those facts that can quench our fears? First, starting with Numbers chapter 13 and 14. While the majority of the spies cringed in fear, Joshua and Caleb didn't allow it to overwhelm them. They too had seen the giants and their fortified cities. Perhaps they too know that in themselves they didn't have the power to conquer the land. But unlike others, they faced their fears with a different set of truths or facts. I want to read Numbers chapter 14, verse 8 and 9. This is Caleb and Joshua speaking to the fearful crowd. If the Lord is pleased with us, He will lead us into that land, a land flowing with milk and honey, and He will give it to us. Only do not rebel against the Lord, and do not be afraid of the people of the land, because we will devour them. Their protection is gone, but the Lord is with us. Do not be afraid of them. The Lord is with us. Do not be afraid of them. They face their fears with truths about God. And I want to underline that phrase. They said, the Lord is with us. Instead of focusing more on the facts leading to fear, they focused on who their God is and what He could do for them. So, brothers and sisters, when we are faced with fears, turn to God and meditate on the truths related to His nature, character, and actions. Bombard your minds intentionally with God facts. Perhaps we also need to minimize our exposure to facts that may lead us to fear. Lessen your time if necessary, looking at terrifying news reports. This is not escapism. Instead, it is an effort in renewing our minds as we read in Romans chapter 12, verse 2. Read the Bible. Read books that focus on who God is and His character. And I want to suggest 2 books that were of great help to me in my crisis. Trusting God, written by Jerry Bridges, and Suffering and Sovereignty of God by John Piper. Those are blessed books for times like this. Now, I want you to understand that knowing who God is the thing that will lead us to keep our trust in Him. If we don't know who our God is, or His character, or His actions, we will never be able to keep our trust in Him. And then, trusting God results in peace. So there is this equation. Know who God is, that will lead you to trust. And when you trust in Him, that brings about peace in our lives. And I want to read 3 verses here. Psalm 55 verse 23. But as for me, I trust in you. These are the words of David as he concludes Psalm 55. But as for me, I trust in you. Psalm 112 verse 7. He is not afraid of bad news, bad report. His heart is firm, trusting in the Lord. And then we also know Isaiah chapter 26 verse 3. You keep him in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed on you because he trusts in you. I want to conclude here by reading those words from Isaiah. Fear not, for I am with you. Be not dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you. Yes, I will help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. Brothers and sisters, during this time of unprecedented crisis, fear and panic, may these words of our Lord quench all our fears.